Okay, let's just dive right into it. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating breakdown from Web Dev Simplified. And, it connects this ancient historical allegory directly to the future of your software development career. Now, I know that might sound a little out there at first, but stick with me here because the parallels, they are absolutely striking. We're going to explore why mastering your core fundamentals is literally the key to surviving and thriving in today's wild tech landscape. So, could a 5,600-year-old story really predict the trajectory of your modern programming career? It's a pretty bold claim, right? But the narrative we're looking at today raises a massive red flag about long-term career stability for professional devs. Look, we're living in an era where tools are doing more and more of the heavy lifting. But what actually happens when we stop lifting altogether? Well, let's find out. That brings us to Section 1, the illiterate prince. So, our source lays out this story. Way back in the day, literacy wasn't exactly common, right? And this king decides his son, the prince, really needs to learn to read and write so he can stand out. The catch? The prince finds learning the fundamentals of literacy incredibly tedious. It's hard work, and frankly, he just hates the process. But the prince is smart, and he's got one massive advantage, practically infinite wealth. So instead of actually learning, he just hires a scribe to follow him around. Everywhere he goes, this scribe reads every sign, writes every letter. And initially, it works wonderfully. The prince gets the whole shebang done with zero personal effort. But, eventually the cracks start to show. At first, it's just minor inconveniences. Maybe the scribe gets sick one day, and suddenly the prince is totally helpless. But then it gets worse. The prince starts organizing these important meetings via letters, and people start showing up on the totally wrong days. They're super annoyed because they're a day early or a day late. And why? Because the scribe was making simple, accidental mistakes, writing a 14 or a 15 instead of a 13. And the kicker? The prince had absolutely no way to verify those dates because he literally couldn't read the letters himself. Over time, these little hiccups build into an absolute catastrophe. Let's trace it out. In year 1, it's all convenience, right? Smooth sailing. By year 3, he's just kind of ignoring those date errors. But then we hit the critical turning point. The scribe realizes the prince is completely illiterate. So what does he do? He begins quietly manipulating what he's reading and writing to serve his own interests. If the prince wants a policy written, the scribe just tweaks the wording to benefit himself and his buddies. This compounding ignorance goes on for years. The prince is entirely blind to it all. Until finally, bam! He and his entire family are overthrown, totally ruined. The prince is left with no wealth, no scribe, and zero ability to read or write. He is left at absolute zero. Which leads us to Section 2, the modern-day scribe. Okay, so here is the absolutely crucial point, how perfectly this old story maps directly to modern software engineering. Think about it. The prince, that's the modern programmer. The scribe, that's modern AI. And the letters, that's the code. Our source makes the argument that if you don't actually learn how to program, if you don't know what the code is doing behind the scenes, you are walking straight into the exact same trap as the prince. Sure, at first you get way more done with way less effort. You just tell the AI what to do, it spits out the code, and honestly, it feels like absolute magic. But that magic has a price. Section 3, the cost of ignorance. Look, even if an AI tool is 99.9999999% perfect, it is going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. It's just going to happen. And if you don't actually understand the underlying code concepts, those mistakes are going to compound on themselves entirely unseen. You're basically putting all your trust in a system that you literally cannot verify. And that brings us to the anatomy of an AI disaster. Step 1. The AI generates code for your application, but it rates in a super subtle security hole. Step 2. Because you're acting like the illiterate prince, relying entirely on the AI, you can't read the code well enough to spot the flaw. Step 3. That vulnerability goes live. And as our source rightly points out, the absolute worst part is that you usually won't even know there's a problem until it is actively exploited by someone in production. Deploying code you cannot read is basically a ticking time bomb. Moving on to Section 4, the dependency trap. If you skip over learning those core concepts, you hit an incredibly low skill ceiling, and you hit it fast. Think about it. Your maximum capability as a developer literally becomes whatever the AI's maximum capability is. If the AI makes a bug it can't fix, well, you're completely stuck. Plus, you've just become entirely dependent on a third-party tool. What happens when those AI subscription prices inevitably jump up?
If you get priced out, or hey, what if the service just goes down for a day? You are right back to being the prince who lost his wealth. You're left with absolutely nothing, totally unable to do the job you've been relying on.
Let's pivot to something more empowering. Section 5, future-proofing your career.
Now, I want to be super clear about this. Mastering your core fundamentals does not mean you stop using AI. Not at all. It actually means you superpower your AI coding. It's totally fine to let AI write a bunch of code for you, but you have to know what that code is doing. You've got to be able to jump in there and fix it manually when things break. When you actually understand the fundamentals, AI goes from being this fragile crutch you're desperately leaning on to being an incredibly powerful tool that you fully command, a real game changer. So, how do you build that unshakable foundation? Well, the source recommends following a complete web development roadmap. It focuses heavily on mastering those front-end fundamentals and back-end basics. The recommended resource is packed with over 150 instructional videos, more than 100 articles, and thoughtfully provided cheat sheets, which, by the way, famously come in both light mode and dark mode to fit whatever your coding aesthetic is. The big takeaway here is to utilize resources exactly like this to build your core skills so deeply that when entirely new technologies drop, you can just easily adapt. Actually, I want to read this quote directly from the source because it really hits the nail on the head. Quote, "Learning those core programming skills means no matter what happens in the landscape of AI, you're going to be secure as a developer, able to move forward and adapt." End quote. I mean, that right there, that is what true long-term career stability looks like. It's all about owning your skills, not outsourcing your understanding. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. Are you building a career, or are you just renting an AI? Because the tools, they're always going to change. Prices will fluctuate, algorithms will shift, but your fundamental understanding of how to read and write code, that is yours forever. So be the developer. Don't be the prince. Thanks so much for joining me today, and hey, go out there and master those fundamentals.